alliance. So let's read that. Verse 7. I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace, given me through the working of His power. Although I am less than the least of all God's people, this grace was given me to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God who created all things. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Right? So, in this passage, we see that there's a mission, there's a grand mission given to Paul, and that mission was to share the gospel. Okay? And to share the gospel to the Gentiles, the unsearchable riches of God, of Christ. Because the Gentiles were separated from God. They were enemies of God, and therefore, if no one will introduce the gospel of Christ to them, they will really be lost people. And therefore, that was the mission of Paul, to teach the Gentiles. And the intent of God was this, brothers and sisters. The intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities of the heavenly realm. Just a note, sino yung authorities and rulers of the heavenly realm? We can actually answer that by looking at chapter 6, verse 12 of Ephesians as well. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So, those rulers and authorities of heavenly realms, ito yung mga kaaway ni God. These are the evil forces. And what God's intent was that He will show the church to His enemies, and sort of saying, hey, look, I won. These are my people, and I got my people back. And they are for me, and I will be for them. And if I have restored my relationship with them, I won, talo kayo. And the church is God's trophy. And so this was Paul's mission, to preach to the Gentiles, so that the intent of God to have His church will be fulfilled. Okay? So it was a grand mission. When Barack Obama won the presidential election, he also had a mission to restore the financial standing of the United States, kasi bumagsak siya because of the global financial crisis. And therefore, when he chose people to help him, so when he chose people to support him, he naturally chose the best people, di ba? To help him in that cause. Now, look at what Paul said about himself. I am less than the least of God's people, brothers and sisters. So here we see an insight of God. That he didn't choose the best. In fact, he chose Paul, who himself proclaimed that he was less than the least of God's people. So who was Paul really before he became a Christian and before God called him? He was Saul, diba? And Saul was a persecutor of Christians. He was really a bad man, diba? And if you're going to look at people who deserve to carry out this mission, he's probably the last person you'd consider to carry out the great grand mission. And so I ask you now, brothers and sisters, in your mission to share the gospel and proclaim the gospel, are you sometimes also burdened by your own inhibitions about yourself, diba? About certain insecurities that you have, certain weaknesses that you perceive that you have, brothers and sisters. I don't speak well naman eh. I'm not good enough, diba? I'm not as holy as another person, diba? Hindi naman ako ganun kagapuhan, kaya ang hirap mag-approach. Diba? Ang hirap mag-approach, diba? Buti sana kasing gwapo mo si RJ, diba? And we have those insecurities, and for all sense and purposes, those insecurities could be real, diba? Those things, those things may be true, brothers and sisters. But then, brothers and sisters, look at the people that God chooses. For example, look at Jeremiah. How old was Jeremiah when God called him? Would you say he's mature enough when God called him? Look at Simon, Peter, di ba? What was he? Ano ba tinapos ni Peter, di ba, for God to call him?